The silence was what woke Jose Oliver. Not an alarm, not the California sun slicing through the blackout curtains of his Palo Alto mansion, but a profound, unnatural stillness. The aroma of single-origin Colombian coffee, the usual prelude to his day, was absent. He reached across the king-sized bed, his hand meeting only the cold, undisturbed silk of his wife's side. Annoyance flickered. He padded out of the bedroom, his voice echoing off the marble floors. "Alexis?" The only reply was the hum of the Sub-Zero refrigerator. Then he saw it. A single, perfect drop of blood near the garage door. And on the nightstand, her wedding ring sat like a silent accusation. His world, so meticulously controlled, began to fracture. The Palo Alto mansion gleamed like the cover of an architectural magazine, a symphony of glass, steel, and Italian marble that reflected everything and revealed nothing. Last night, its soundproofed walls had absorbed the chilling prelude to Alexis Ray's disappearance. It had begun, as it always did, with Jose's frustration. The Ethelred Biotech acquisition, a deal he'd called his legacy, had collapsed. 3 months of work, he'd muttered, his knuckles white around his phone as he paced the $100,000 kitchen. Gone. Because a few bleeding heart board members grew a conscience about ethical optics. Alexis moved with the rehearsed precision of a bomb disposal expert. She knew the map of his rage intimately. His jaw was a pressure gauge, the tightening of his fingers, a timer counting down. She placed his coffee, made from beans that cost more than most people's groceries for a month, on the granite island. Her designer sleeves hid the faint yellowing of last week's bruises. "Your coffee, darling," she said, her voice a practiced melody of sweetness that tasted like poison in her mouth. He didn't look up from his tablet. "The word from my source is that someone on their board got a call. An anonymous tip about our aggressive corporate culture." His eyes, cold and dark, finally lifted to meet hers. Funny, isn't it? How private matters find their way out. Alexis's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage of bone. She kept her expression placid, a mask she had perfected over 8 years. "That's terrible, Jose. I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" He moved toward her, his 6'2" frame eclipsing the morning light. He was handsome in the cruel way of predators, a man whose charisma was a weapon. "You're always sorry, aren't you, baby?" His hand shot out, not in a strike, but with a deceptive gentleness, his thumb stroking her jawline. But the pressure was a reminder. "You haven't been talking to your sister again, have you? Sharing our private business? Her sister Cara, her twin, the only lifeline to a world outside this beautiful prison." Their weekly calls were heavily monitored, filled with coded language Alexis prayed Jose wouldn't decipher. "Of course not. I know the rules. Good girl." His thumb pressed harder, just below her ear. "Because rules keep us safe. They keep us together." He leaned in, his breath warm and smelling of expensive whiskey from the night before. "The Henderson deal was my baby, and when I lose something, I find something else to break. You understand that, don't you?" She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Resistance meant escalation. Escalation meant a trip to an urgent care clinic with a fabricated story about falling down the stairs. Compliance was survival. He seemed satisfied, his anger momentarily appeased by her submission. He let her go and turned back to his tablet. "I have a board meeting in an hour. Lay out my grey Armani suit and cancel your lunch with Sarah. I need you on call. This situation requires damage control." The lunch with Sarah, her one friend in this isolated world, was the only thing she'd been looking forward to. Another link to the outside world severed. "Of course, Jose. As she walked toward their master suite, her mind wasn't on the suit. It was on the tiny, military-grade recording device nestled in the underwire of her bra. It had captured everything. The threat, the admission of his controlling nature, the veiled confession of his violence. It was one more file for the collection she'd been building for 3 years. A digital arsenal hidden behind the shoe racks in her closet, inside a small safe he didn't know existed. The plan she and Kara had forged over hundreds of encrypted messages and hushed, tearful phone calls was nearly complete. Last night's tirade wasn't just another night of terror. It was the final piece of evidence. It was the trigger. She had perfected the smile that was her prison uniform. But behind her eyes, a storm was gathering. Jose Oliver thought he was a king in his castle, a master of his universe. He had no idea he was just a character in a story she was writing. A tragedy, where he was the villain, and his downfall was the final chapter. By 9 a.m., Jose's annoyance had curdled into a cold, sharp-edged panic. Alexis wasn't at the spa. She wasn't at the luxury boutiques on University Avenue. Her Tesla was gone from the garage, and the family tracking app he'd insisted she install on her phone showed its location as static, right on the kitchen island where the device lay shattered. This was not a tantrum. This was a statement. He dialed her sister, Kara Ray, a high-powered attorney in Houston. The call connected on the second ring. Kara speaking. Her voice was professional, crisp, and utterly unreadable. "Where is she?" Jose's voice was a low growl, stripped of all pleasantries. A deliberate pause stretched across the line, thick with unspoken history. "I'm sorry. Who is this?" "Don't play games with me, Kara. It's Jose. Where's your sister?" "Jose, it's 7 in the morning in Texas. Is everything all right?" The feigned concern was a masterpiece of condescension. He could practically hear her smiling. "Alexis is gone. Her car, some of her clothes. She left her ring. She must have called you." "Why would she call me, Jose?" Kara's voice turned cool, the professional mask dropping to reveal the steel beneath. "You made it very clear last year that you considered my influence on her destabilizing. I haven't spoken to my sister in 3 weeks, thanks to you." It was true. After he'd discovered they were using a childhood code to communicate, he'd forbidden their calls. He thought he had cut the final thread connecting Alexis to her old life. The realization that they could have found another way, that he could have been outmaneuvered, sent a jolt of fury through him. "She'll be back," he said, more to convince himself than her. "She has nothing without me. She always comes back." "Does she?" The question was quiet, but it landed like a punch. "Marcus. What did you do to her?" The name hung in the air. Marcus. Their father's name. It was Kara's ultimate weapon, a name synonymous with a different kind of domestic tyranny they had both survived as children. A reminder that she saw right through him, saw the monster he shared a name with. He slammed the phone down, the sound echoing his own fracturing control. He spent the next hour on the phone with his executive assistant, Jennifer. "Cancel my morning. I need you to do something for me, off the record. Run a trace on all of Alexis's credit cards, and pull the security footage from the house server for the past 24 hours. Every camera." "Sir, is Mrs. Oliver okay?" Jennifer's voice was laced with a hesitation he'd never heard before. "Just do it, Jennifer." An hour later, Jennifer called back. Her tone was no longer hesitant. It was glacial. "Mr. Oliver, the credit cards were all cancelled yesterday afternoon. Mrs. Oliver also closed the joint savings account she had access to. She did it online at 4:17 p.m. He felt the floor drop out from under him. "The security footage?" "That's the other thing, sir," Jennifer said, her voice strained. "Someone accessed the mainframe last night from an external IP address, a highly encrypted one. They didn't just pull the last 24 hours of footage, They downloaded the entire archive, 8 years' worth of recordings. And they wiped the server clean. The originals are gone. The phone felt slick in his nerveless hand. This wasn't an escape. It was a heist. She hadn't just run away from him. She had stolen her own history, stolen the evidence of her life with him. The mansion, once his fortress, now felt like a crime scene where he was the only suspect. He walked from room to room, seeing not a home but a meticulously documented cage. The cameras he'd installed to monitor her, to control her, had been turned into weapons against him. For 8 years, he had been the hunter, the one who held all the power. Now, in the chilling silence of his perfect home, Jose Oliver was beginning to understand what it felt like to be the prey. The ghost in his machine was his wife, and she was already miles ahead of him. While Jose Oliver was pacing the cold marble of his cage in Palo Alto, the architect of his ruin was 500 miles away, in a sleek Houston law office overlooking the city skyline. Kara Ray sat at her mahogany desk, a portrait of calm, controlled fury. Her office was a command center, and she was a general waging a war she had been planning for years. On one monitor, a secure file transfer was completing. 8 years of Jose's life, every shout, every threat, every moment of casual cruelty, now safely stored on a server he could never touch. On another, she drafted an anonymous email. The recipient list was small but potent. The 3 most influential members of the board of directors at Oliver Innovations. Her hands didn't shake as she attached the first file, a short, high-definition video clip. It was from 2 months ago. The audio was crystal clear. "You think you have a choice?" Jose's voice snarled from the speakers. "You exist in this house because I allow it. Your friends, your family, your very life. It's all a privilege I grant you. And I can take it away." The video showed him backing Alexis into a corner, his finger jabbing at her chest. Kara watched the clip, her face impassive, but her heart ached with a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight. She remembered the phone call after that incident. Alexis had been whispering, hidden in a guest bathroom, her voice trembling as she recounted the fight. "He found out I sent money to Mum's nursing home," Alexis had sobbed quietly. "He said he would cut her off if I ever did anything behind his back again. He's got me, Kara. He's got all of us." "Not for much longer," Kara had promised, her voice a fierce whisper. "We're almost there, Lex. Just hold on. Be smart. Keep recording." That promise was the fuel for the fire she was about to light. This wasn't just about justice. It was about reclaiming the sister Jose had tried to erase. For years, she had watched him systematically dismantle Alexis, isolating her from family, controlling her finances, chipping away at her confidence until the vibrant, brilliant woman she once was became a ghost in her own life. Kara had been forced to play a long, agonizing game, pretending to be civil, swallowing her rage during holidays, all while secretly advising Alexis on how to build an escape route, one piece of digital evidence at a time. She hit send on the email. The subject line was simple: a question of leadership. The body of the email was even simpler. "Before your emergency meeting this morning to discuss the Ethelred deal, you may want to review the attached file concerning your CEO's corporate culture. More will follow. Next, she opened a complex network of offshore accounts she had set up months ago using a series of shell corporations. With a few keystrokes, she initiated a transfer. It wasn't a huge amount, just enough to be noticed. A precise sum moved from one of Jose's lesser-known personal investment funds into an account that would vanish in 12 hours. It was a shot across the bow, a signal that his financial empire was just as vulnerable as his reputation. She leaned back in her leather chair, the city lights beginning to twinkle against the twilight sky. The first phase was complete. She had armed the bomb and started the timer. Jose thought he was looking for a runaway wife. He had no idea he was fighting a war on two fronts, against a ghost from his past and a lawyer who had nothing left to lose. Kara's grief was a whetstone, and for 8 years she had been sharpening her anger into a blade so fine, so sharp, he would never see it coming until it severed him from everything he held dear. The game was afoot, and she knew every move he would make before he did. Within 48 hours, the cracks in Jose Oliver's foundation had become gaping chasms. The anonymous video sent shockwaves through the board. His emergency meeting about the failed Ethelred deal was derailed by quiet, tense questions about his management style. He blustered and denied, but the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted. His personal life was in a similar state of collapse. He hired Frank Morrison, a grizzled, cynical private investigator with a reputation for finding people who didn't want to be found. "People don't just vanish, Mr. Oliver," Frank said, his office smelling of stale coffee and desperation. He lit a cigarette, ignoring the no smoking sign on his own wall. "Not in this day and age. Your wife was smart, smarter than you gave her credit for." "Alexis couldn't organize a grocery list without my help," Jose snapped, the lie tasting sour in his own mouth. Frank let out a humorless laugh. "That's what every abusive husband says right before his wife takes him to the cleaners. You think you had her on a leash, but she was building a ladder while you were busy holding the chain." The words hit Jose with the force of a physical blow. The next day, his assistant, Jennifer, walked into his office. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and disgust. She placed her resignation letter on his desk. "Jennifer, what is this?" he demanded. "I received an email this morning, Mr. Oliver," she said, her voice trembling. "An anonymous one. It had a video file attached." She couldn't meet his eyes. "The one from your kitchen, from the night of the Henderson Gala last year. When you—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "I can't work here anymore. I can't be a part of this." She turned and walked out, leaving him alone in the silence of his glass-walled office. The one person who managed every detail of his professional life had just abandoned him. The walls were closing in. 2 days later, Frank Morrison called him back into his cramped office. He spread a series of grainy photographs across his desk like tarot cards predicting doom. They were of Alexis, taken over the past 6 months. Alexis meeting a woman in a coffee shop in San Jose. Alexis entering a nondescript office building in Oakland. "Your wife was living a double life," Frank stated, tapping ash into a styrofoam cup. "These aren't shopping trips. That woman she's meeting with? Her twin sister, Cara Ray. And that building in Oakland. It houses a legal aid clinic and a support group for survivors of domestic abuse." Jose stared at the photos. In them, Alexis looked different. Her posture was straighter, her face more animated. She was smiling, laughing with her sister, a genuine expression he hadn't seen in years. It was the face of a stranger. "It gets worse," Frank said, sliding one last photograph across the desk. This was taken 3 days ago, at a gas station just outside Houston. The image showed Cara Ray filling up the gas tank of a Tesla. Alexis's Tesla. But Alexis wasn't with her. Cara was alone. "So she's in Houston," Jose breathed, a surge of adrenaline cutting through his panic. He had a location, a target. Frank shook his head slowly. "You're not listening. Your wife has an identical twin who is a shark of a lawyer. They've been planning this for years. This isn't a divorce, Mr. Oliver. This is a coordinated demolition. My advice, stop trying to find your wife and find the best damn defense attorney you can afford. because a storm is coming, and you're standing right in the middle of it. As Jose left the investigator's office, the Palo Alto sun felt cold. The image of the two sisters laughing together was burned into his mind. He had been playing checkers, moving his pieces with brute force and intimidation. He now realized he was in a chess match against two queens, and they were already calling checkmate. He'd never even known the game had begun. Obsession became Jose's new reality. He ignored Frank's advice, consumed by the perverse need to find Alexis, to confront her, to reassert the control he was so rapidly losing. He saw her face everywhere, in the crowds on the street, in the reflections of his office windows. He spent hours rewatching the single security clip he still had from a neighbor's camera, showing Alexis's Tesla pulling out of their driveway in the pre-dawn darkness. He was hunting a ghost, and the chase was driving him to the edge of sanity. His world was a cacophony of bad news. A second video had been leaked, this time to a tech blog. His stock plummeted. Investors were calling, demanding answers. He was becoming a pariah in the valley he once ruled. But all of it was just noise. The only thing that mattered was finding her. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. It wasn't Frank Morrison. The caller ID was a blocked number. "Is this Jose Oliver?" The voice was male, professional with a weary edge. "Who is this?" Jose demanded. "This is Detective Rodriguez with the Houston Police Department. We've been trying to reach you for the past 2 days, sir. Your assistant said you were unavailable." Houston. His blood ran cold. "What is this about?" "It's concerning your wife, Alexis Ray Oliver," the detective said. "There's been an incident. We need you to come in and make a positive identification." The words didn't compute. Identification? What are you talking about? She's with her sister. I have a PI looking for her. There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. "Sir," Detective Rodriguez said, his voice softening with a practiced grim sympathy. "A woman matching your wife's description was found in a hotel room here in Houston 3 days ago. We believe it's her." The 1-hour flight to Houston felt like a lifetime suspended between two realities. One where Alexis was a brilliant, vengeful adversary, and another, impossible one he couldn't yet comprehend. He walked into the Harris County morgue, the sterile, chemical smell assaulting his senses. The attendant pulled back the sheet with a practiced indifference. Jose's world stopped. It was Alexis. Her face, pale and still under the harsh fluorescent lights, the small scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood fall. It was unquestionably her, but it was also wrong. She looked peaceful, a serenity she had never possessed in the 8 years he had known her. "Apparent overdose," Detective Rodriguez explained gently beside him. "Combination of pills and alcohol. The medical examiner says she'd been deceased for several hours before housekeeping found her. 3 days ago. 3 days ago." While he had been hiring investigators, staring at photographs, consumed with rage at her betrayal, she had been lying here. Cold. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The videos, the financial attacks, the taunting, calculated destruction of his life. It hadn't been Alexis. It couldn't have been. He had been fighting a ghost. The true architect of his ruin wasn't the woman he was hunting. It was her sister. Kara had been using her own identity as a shield, creating a trail for him to follow, while the person he was truly after was already beyond his reach. Beyond anyone's reach. The reversal was absolute, a gut-wrenching twist that stole the air from his lungs. He hadn't been outmaneuvered by his timid, broken wife. He had been targeted by a grieving, vengeful mastermind who was using her dead sister's pain as a weapon. His obsession with finding Alexis had been a fool's errand, a diversion designed to keep him occupied, while Kara dismantled his life, piece by piece. He had thought he was in a battle for control. He was actually the clueless subject of a meticulously executed post-mortem revenge. "Mr. Oliver," the detective's voice broke through the fog. "Given the circumstances, and some allegations that have recently come to our attention, I need to inform you that you are a person of interest in your wife's death. The hotel room in Houston had been anonymous, sterile, a place chosen for its lack of character. It was here, 4 days before her body was found, that Alexis Ray made her final move. She sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, a constellation of purple and blue bruises blooming across her ribs and arms, hidden beneath a soft cashmere sweater. Across from her, sitting on the room's single armchair, was Kara. Her twin's face was a mask of grief and cold, simmering rage. The drive from Palo Alto had been a blur of pain and adrenaline. Every mile put between her and Jose felt like a breath of air after years of drowning. Kara had met her at a designated rendezvous point in a small town in Arizona, swapping cars and burner phones with the efficiency of spies. Now, in the quiet of the hotel room, the adrenaline was gone, replaced by a bone-deep weariness that felt older than time itself. "He broke my rib this time, Kara," Alexis whispered, her voice hoarse. She didn't need to show her. Kara, who had patched up more injuries than she could count over the years, could see it in the way she held herself, the shallow breaths she took. The Ethelred deal fell through. He came home like a hurricane. I really thought he was going to kill me. She recounted the final assault, her voice devoid of tears, replaced by a chilling numbness. She described him standing over her, his face contorted with a satisfaction that terrified her more than the violence itself. She told Kara about the recording device, the one that had captured every word, every threat. "It's all there," Alexis said, handing her a small encrypted USB drive. "Everything. The audio from that night, the complete server backup from the house, all the financial records I could copy. It's all in here." Kara took the drive, her fingers closing around it as if it were a sacred relic. "This is it, Lex. This is more than enough. We can go to the police right now. We can put him away for years." Alexis shook her head slowly, a faint, sad smile on her lips. "The police?" "Kara, he owns half the politicians in Santa Clara County. He'd bury it in legal fees. He'd paint me as an unstable, gold-digging wife. And what would happen to us? To Mum? He threatened them. He said he would destroy everyone I've ever cared about. A restraining order is just a piece of paper to a man like Jose. He would never, ever let me go." The terrible truth settled between them. Even in escape, she was still trapped. Jose's power extended far beyond the walls of their mansion. "So what do we do?" Kara asked, her voice tight. "We do what we planned," Alexis said, her gaze steady and clear for the first time in years. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, resolute finality. "You unleash the storm. You burn his world to the ground. You use that drive and you destroy him. Not just legally, publicly, financially. You make it so he has nowhere to hide." "We will destroy him," Kara corrected. "You'll be safe here. I'll get you set up with a new identity, a new life." Alexis reached out and placed her hand on her sister's. "There's no new life for me, Kara. Don't you see? He'll never stop hunting me. As long as I'm alive, you and Mum will never be safe from him. He'll use you to get to me. He'll never stop." A horrifying understanding began to dawn on Kara's face. "Lex, no. Don't even think it. We'll find a way. We'll go somewhere he can't find us." "There is no such place," Alexis said softly. "He broke something inside me that night. Not a bone. Something deeper. the part of me that knew how to hope. She took a deep breath, wincing in pain. He took my whole life. The only thing I have left to give her is my death. "Alexis, please," Kara begged, tears finally streaming down her face. "No, this is my choice, my final move. My death makes me a martyr, and you my avenging angel. It gives you the moral high ground no one can question. It makes his destruction not just revenge, but justice for a dead woman. He can't hurt a ghost, Kara. And he can't use our family against me if I'm gone." She made Kara promise. A terrible, sacred vow made in the suffocating silence of that hotel room. "Promise you will finish it. Promise me you will not let him win. Promise me you will make him pay for everything." Kara, her heart shattering, gave her the promise. It was the last conversation they ever had. Alexis gave her sister the weapon, the motive, and the blessing to carry out the war. It was an act of ultimate despair, but also an act of ultimate love, a sacrifice to ensure her sister could deliver the justice she herself would never live to see. The FBI raid came at dawn. It wasn't a quiet knock. It was a battering ram splintering the custom oak of Jose Oliver's front door. 20 agents in tactical gear swarmed his pristine mansion, their boots tracking mud across the white marble floors that had once reflected his success and now only revealed his shame. Jose was dragged from his bed, the fog of sleep instantly replaced by the ice-cold shock of reality. "Jose Oliver, you're under arrest." The voice belonged to a stern, dark-haired woman in a Navy FBI windbreaker, Agent Sarah Chen. "Conspiracy to commit fraud, violation of federal stalking statutes, and domestic terrorism." The Miranda rights were a distant buzz in his ears as they clicked the handcuffs around his wrists, wrists that had once commanded boardrooms, now bound and powerless. Through his panoramic windows, he could see news vans lining his street, like vultures gathering for a feast. The agents moved through his house with methodical efficiency, turning his sanctuary into a sprawling evidence locker. They weren't just seizing computers and phones. They were photographing the dent in the refrigerator door where he had slammed Alexis's head. They were using luminol to reveal the faint, cleaned-up bloodstains on the bedroom carpet that the housekeeping staff had missed. Every corner of his home was whispering the secrets of his brutality. "This is harassment," he protested weakly as they led him through his own living room. "My wife is dead. This is all circumstantial, a fabrication by her vengeful sister." Agent Chen paused, turning to face him. Her expression was utterly devoid of sympathy. "Your wife's twin sister has provided a very compelling case, Mr. Oliver, but the most damning evidence didn't come from her." She gestured toward his study, where 2 agents were carefully boxing up the contents of his private safe. "It came from you." A younger agent emerged, holding a manila envelope with gloved hands. He handed it to Agent Chen. She pulled out the contents, her eyes scanning them before she held one up for Jose to see. It was a photograph. One he had taken himself. A close-up of a large, ugly bruise on Alexis's shoulder, artistically framed against her pale skin. He remembered taking it, a perverse sense of pride in the mark he had left. Agent Chen shuffled through the other items. More photographs of injuries, arranged chronologically. Medical records from emergency room visits for accidents, and handwritten notes in his own meticulous script, detailing behavioral corrections and her responses to discipline. He had documented his own abuse like a research project, a case study in dominance and control. He told himself it was for their protection, proof that his actions were measured, not impulsive. Now, under the cold, harsh light of a federal investigation, he saw it for what it was. The careful record-keeping of a monster. "Jesus Christ, Oliver," Agent Chen said, her voice laced with a disgust that cut deeper than any physical blow. "You kept trophies. The word hung in the air, grotesque and undeniable. Trophies. He was escorted out the front door, the flashbulbs of the news cameras blinding him. He saw the faces of his neighbors, peering from behind their curtains, their expressions a mixture of shock and revulsion. The man they knew as the brilliant, charismatic tech visionary was being perp-walked out of his mansion in handcuffs, exposed as a violent, pathetic abuser. As they pushed him into the back of the unmarked sedan, he finally understood the totality of his defeat. Kara hadn't just exposed his crimes. She had led the authorities to the evidence he himself had so carefully curated. He hadn't just been outmaneuvered in a game of chess. He had been the one to hand his opponent the queen, the board, and the rulebook, all while believing he was the one in control. The reckoning wasn't just coming for him. It was already here, and it had been built from his own pride and cruelty. The federal courtroom was a theater, and the public execution of Jose Oliver's life was the main event. Dressed in an ill-fitting orange jumpsuit that had replaced his tailored suits, he was a spectacle of fallen power. The gallery was packed with journalists, victims' advocates, and the morbidly curious. But Jose's eyes were fixed on one person, Kara Ray, sitting in the front row, a black suit her armor, her expression as serene and unyielding as a marble statue. When the prosecutor called her to the stand, a hush fell over the courtroom. She walked with a poise that commanded attention, not as a grieving sister, but as an officer of the court with a case to build. "Ms. Ray," the prosecutor began, "can you tell the court about the evidence your sister, Alexis, collected over the years?" "I can," Kara said, her voice clear and resonant. "My sister was a victim, but she was not powerless. She was a strategist. For the last 3 years of her marriage, she treated her own abuse like a legal case she was building against her abuser. She gestured to a large screen set up for the jury. She documented everything. The first image appeared, a photo of a leather-bound journal. This contains detailed, dated accounts of 127 separate incidents of physical violence and over 1,000 examples of psychological abuse, including threats against our family. Next, she played an audio recording. It was from the night the Ethelred deal collapsed. The courtroom listened in horrified silence to Jose's chilling threats, his voice a venomous whisper promising to break her. Several jurors flinched. "He thought he was asserting his power," Kara explained, her voice steady. "What he was actually doing was providing admissible evidence for a federal domestic terrorism charge." She moved on to the videos, clips from the 8 years of security footage Alexis had stolen from him. A montage of cruelty played out on the screen. Jose slapping Alexis in their kitchen, shoving her against a wall, his voice a constant barrage of insults and commands. "The defendant treated his wife as property," Kara said, narrating the horror show. "He used his wealth and technical expertise to create a high-tech prison. He monitored her calls, tracked her movements, and used corporate resources to ensure she had no escape routes. She presented financial records showing payments to private investigators to follow Alexis, receipts for spyware installed on her devices. It was a portrait of systematic, obsessive control." Jose watched, numb, as his own private brutality was dissected for the world to see. The power he'd felt in those moments had curdled into public shame. Every person in that room was seeing him for what he truly was. A pathetic coward who could only feel strong by terrorizing someone he had vowed to protect. Then Kara's composure cracked, just for a moment, revealing the raw grief beneath the legal precision. Her voice trembled as she spoke her final words. "My sister knew that leaving him was the most dangerous time for a victim. She knew he would hunt her down. So she created a plan where her own death would become the catalyst for his destruction. She died by suicide, Your Honor, because this man convinced her that it was the only way to escape him and protect her family. He didn't just beat her body, he systematically murdered her spirit until she had nothing left. She looked directly at Jose, her eyes locking onto his. There was no hatred in them, only a vast, empty finality. He took her life, but she made me promise to finish what she started, to ensure that he would face consequences for every bruise, every threat, every moment of terror. This isn't revenge, Your Honor. This is the fulfillment of a dying woman's last wish. This is justice. The courtroom was utterly silent, the weight of her words pressing down on everyone. Jose felt his world, already shattered, dissolving into nothing. The Queen's gambit had been played. He hadn't just lost the game. He'd been erased from the board. The climax of the hearing arrived not with a passionate speech, but with a quiet statement from the prosecutor, holding a document that had just been delivered to his desk. Your Honor, he said, his voice grave, we have the final results from the Harris County Medical Examiner's autopsy report for Alexis Ray Oliver. There is new information that is material to this case. Judge Williams, a stern woman whose patience had clearly evaporated, peered down from the bench. Proceed. The prosecutor cleared his throat. The ME found internal injuries consistent with the assault that occurred on the night of the Ethelred Deal collapse. But there's something else. At the time of her death, Alexis Ray was 6 weeks pregnant. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. The sound was a physical force, sucking the air out of the room. Kara, standing near the witness box, swayed on her feet, her hands flying to her mouth as a sob she could no longer contain tore from her chest. Even she hadn't known. Jose heard the words, but his mind refused to process them. Pregnant. The word was alien, a sound from another language, another universe. A universe where he wasn't a monster. He looked from the prosecutor's grim face to Kara's devastated one. And finally, the reality crashed down on him with the force of a tidal wave. He hadn't just killed his wife's spirit. He had beaten a pregnant woman, his wife, carrying his child. The final brutal assault hadn't just been the catalyst for her suicide. It had been an attack on 2 lives. A guttural, animal sound of anguish escaped his lips. It was a sound of absolute psychic collapse. His carefully constructed world of control and denial didn't just fracture. It was obliterated, reduced to cosmic dust. The bailiffs moved toward him as his legs gave out, and he crumpled into his chair, a hollowed-out shell of a man. Based on this evidence, the prosecutor's voice cut through the chaos. The state wishes to add charges of involuntary manslaughter and fetal homicide. The final verdict was a formality. Jose Oliver, the tech titan, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His legacy was not innovation. It was infamy. 2 years later, the building in downtown Houston was filled with light. Glass walls revealed not scenes of intimidation, but rooms where women shared stories, where lawyers offered pro bono help, where children played safely while their mothers attended job training workshops. At the entrance, elegant silver letters spelled out the name, the Alexis Ray Foundation. Funded entirely by the seized assets of Jose Oliver, it had become a national model for supporting survivors of domestic abuse. Kara Ray stood at a podium during its annual fundraising gala, a picture of grace and strength. My sister believed she was trapped, she told the crowded room. But her legacy proves she was never powerless. Her suffering has been transformed into a sanctuary. Her pain has been turned into protection for thousands of others. The wealth one man used to control and terrorize is now being used to set women free. From his cell in San Quentin, where he was known only as the baby killer and kept in protective custody for his own safety, Jose Oliver existed in a world of gray concrete and crushing regret. He would spend the rest of his life owned by the memory of what he had destroyed. Kara, however, was looking toward the future. The foundation was her purpose, a living testament to her sister's resilience. In saving others, she had slowly, painstakingly, begun to save herself. Justice, she had learned, wasn't just about punishment. It was about rebuilding. It was about ensuring that even from the deepest darkness, light could find a way to grow. The story of Alexis Ray began in a gilded cage, a tale of silent suffering and control. But her legacy was not one of a victim. It was a testament to the quiet, unyielding strength of a woman who turned her pain into a blueprint for justice. Through her sister's unwavering love, her tragedy was transformed into a powerful movement, proving that even when a life is taken, a voice can live on, creating a chorus of hope for countless others. Her abuser was left with nothing but the echo of his own cruelty, while her name became a symbol of survival, resilience, and the enduring power of a promise kept. If this story of justice and resilience moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about the strength of the human spirit. Share this with someone who needs to know that no one has to stay broken forever. The scent of fresh paint and lavender still clung to the air in the nursery, a room of soft greys and hopeful yellows. Marcia Smith stood frozen, one hand protectively cradling the swell of her 7-month pregnancy, the other clutching an ultrasound photo of their son. Her gaze was fixed on the iPad her husband had left on the changing table. The screen was still lit, displaying a chain of messages with a name she knew all too well, Ava Chen. Tonight was incredible. You're a world away from diapers and domesticity. The words blurred through her tears, each one a shard of glass in her heart. 6 months. The affair had been going on for 6 months. A quiet sob escaped her lips as the perfect world James Orsini had built for them shattered into 1,000,000 irreparable pieces. The Chicago skyline glittered like a field of scattered diamonds outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse on Lakeshore Drive. Earlier that morning, everything had felt perfect, a portrait of modern success. James Orsini, the self-made tech mogul who had clawed his way from a blue-collar neighborhood in Philly to the pinnacle of finance, was the sun around which their universe revolved. At 38, he possessed an empire, a ruthless reputation in the boardroom, and a beautiful wife who had willingly stepped back from her own promising career as an architect to build their home. Marcia traced the rim of her coffee mug, watching the sailboats glide across the vast, blue expanse of Lake Michigan. She had designed this space herself, a minimalist haven of warm woods, cool marble, and open air, a sanctuary from the city's relentless energy. Every corner was a testament to their shared dream, or so she had thought. "He's kicking again," she had said, her voice bright with the simple magic of it. "I think he's going to be a soccer player." James, already dressed in a bespoke Italian suit that cost more than her first car, had glanced up from his phone, his smile practiced but distant. "That's great, honey. Just make sure he doesn't scuff the floors." He'd kissed her forehead, a perfunctory gesture, his mind clearly 1,000 miles away, lost in algorithms and acquisition strategies. "I've got back-to-back meetings until late. Don't wait up. Don't forget, my appointment with Dr. Evans is at 4, she reminded him gently. "You promised you'd try to make this one." His eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite name, annoyance, before it was masked by a practiced look of concern. "Of course. I'll move heaven and earth. I've got it in my calendar." But now, hours later, the lie of that promise screamed at her from the iPad's glowing screen. "Forget the doctor. I've got a better way to check your pulse." Ava's message was time-stamped, 9:15 a.m., just moments after he had left. He had never intended to come. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The late-night board meetings, the sudden business trips to Singapore and London, the faint, unfamiliar scent of perfume on his shirts that he'd brushed off as something from the airport. The emotional chasm that had opened between them, which she had desperately tried to fill with talk of their son, their future, their home. She had excused his distance as the pressure of his work, the burden of a man carrying the world on his shoulders. What a fool she had been. He hadn't been carrying the world. He had been building a second one, a secret one where she and their unborn child had no place. Her mother's words from a phone call last week echoed in her mind. "Marcia, you sound tired. Is everything really okay? James is working so hard, but is he there for you?" She had defended him, of course. "He's just under a lot of stress, Mum. Building an empire isn't a 9-to-5 job." The irony was a bitter pill in her throat. He was building an empire, all right, but its foundations were rotten with deceit. Her hand trembled as she scrolled up, morbid curiosity compelling her to witness the full extent of the carnage. There were photos, James and Ava clinking champagne glasses on a private jet, their heads close together in a hotel bar in Soho. A selfie where Ava's hand rested possessively on his chest. They looked like a power couple, equals in ambition and appetite. A wave of nausea washed over her, more potent than any morning sickness she had endured. The power imbalance in her own marriage was suddenly starkly clear. She had given up her firm, her projects, her name, to become Mrs. Orsini, the graceful, supportive wife who curated their perfect life. In return, he had given her this gilded cage, and while she was nesting, he was out flying with someone else. Her breath hitched. The nursery, once a space of boundless joy and anticipation, now felt like a mausoleum. The tiny hand-knitted blanket from her grandmother draped over the crib seemed to mock her. The mobile of smiling whales and stars danced silently above, oblivious to the storm raging below. She sank onto the plush glider, the iPad falling from her numb fingers and clattering onto the hardwood floor. The sound was unnervingly loud in the cavernous silence of the penthouse. She wasn't just heartbroken. She was erased. For 6 months, her pregnancy, the most profound and vulnerable journey of her life, had been the backdrop to his sordid affair. Every gentle kick from their son, every moment of awe and fear she had shared with James, had been a lie he'd carried back to another woman's bed. A cold, hard resolve began to form in the pit of her stomach, displacing the grief. She would not scream. She would not cry and throw things. A confrontation was what he would expect. He would weather her tears, deploy his arsenal of carefully worded apologies, and twist the narrative until she was the one who felt unreasonable. He was a master of control, of managing outcomes, but he had made one fatal miscalculation. He had underestimated the woman he married. He had forgotten that before she was his wife, Marcia Smith was a woman who knew how to build things and how to tear them down. The air in the private club was thick with the scent of old leather, expensive whiskey, and ambition. James Orsini swirled the amber liquid in his glass, the ice clinking like a slow, steady heartbeat. Across the low-lit table, Ava Chen watched him, her eyes as sharp and calculating as the cut of her diamond earrings. She was a venture capitalist, a shark in a Chanel suit, and in the cutthroat world of Chicago finance, she was one of the few people James considered a true peer. "The board at Omnicorp is getting cold feet," she said, her voice a low purr. "They think your valuation is too aggressive. They need a little reassurance." "Reassurance is my specialty," James replied, a smirk playing on his lips. He thrived on this, the hunt, the negotiation, the subtle dance of power. It was clean, logical, a world of winners and losers, a world he understood. It was a world away from the one waiting for him at home. Lately, home had started to feel like an alien planet. It was a world of sonograms, color swatches for the nursery, and conversations about birthing plans. Marcia, once his partner in witty debates about politics and art, now spoke a language he couldn't comprehend. She spoke of trimesters and cravings and a deep, visceral joy that felt utterly foreign to him. He loved her, of course he did. But the impending arrival of their son felt less like a blessing and more like an anchor, threatening to drag him down into a sea of domesticity he had spent his entire life trying to escape. His phone vibrated on the table. Marcia Smith. He let it go to voicemail. Ava raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Everything all right on the home front?" "Everything's perfect," he said, the lie tasting like ash. He pushed the thought of the doctor's appointment from his mind. It was just a checkup. Marcia was strong, capable. She didn't need him there. What she needed was for him to close this Omnicorp deal, to secure their future, to keep the gilded cage intact. It was the logic he used to justify everything. Ava leaned forward, her perfume a subtle, intoxicating scent of sandalwood and citrus. "I heard you passed on the Nakatomi Tower project." Too risky. The question was a test, and he knew it. "Too boring," he countered. "I'm looking for disruption, not renovation." "Good," she said, her knee brushing his under the table, "because I have something for you. Something disruptive." She slid a folder across the table. It was a stealth startup in the biotech space, a company with the potential to revolutionize gene therapy. It was brilliant, audacious, and wildly undervalued. They're looking for a lead investor, a silent partner, someone with vision. The thrill of the chase surged through him, a familiar, welcome high. This was what he was built for. This was real. The abstract concept of a son, of a family, paled in comparison to the tangible victory of a deal like this. Ava understood that part of him, the relentless, hungry part that Marcia had tried to soothe. Ava didn't soothe. She sharpened. "You're a world away from diapers and domesticity," he'd texted her earlier, and he'd meant it. With her, he wasn't an expectant father. He was James Orsini, titan of industry. He felt seen, desired for the power he wielded, not for the stability he could provide. His phone buzzed again, a text this time. "Just checking in. Hope the meeting is going well. The baby's heart rate is perfect. Strong, just like his dad. Love you." A wave of guilt, sharp and unwelcome, pierced through the adrenaline. He quickly typed back, "Great news. Meeting is running long. We'll be late. Love you too." Another lie, stacked upon the last. He rationalized it. He was protecting her from the stress of his world. It was for the best. "So," Ava said, her voice dropping, drawing him back in. "Are you in?" He looked at her, at the gleam in her eyes that mirrored his own ambition. She was a reflection of the man he had been before the penthouse, before the marriage, before the baby. She was the escape hatch. "I'm in," he said, his decision sealing more than just a business deal. Hours later, they were in her apartment in the Gold Coast, a sterile, modern space that felt more like a showroom than a home. The folder lay forgotten on her coffee table. The pretense of business had dissolved with the second bottle of wine. Her lips were on his, her hands unbuttoning his shirt, and he was sinking into the familiar oblivion of forbidden passion. It wasn't about love. He knew that. It wasn't even about desire, not really. It was about control. In his world, he controlled the variables. He mitigated the risks. Fatherhood was the ultimate unknown, a variable he couldn't model or predict. It terrified him in a way no billion-dollar deal ever could. His own father had been a ghost in his childhood, a man defined by his absence, leaving behind a legacy of emotional distance that James had sworn he would never repeat. Yet here he was, running from the very responsibility he feared, becoming something worse than a ghost, a liar. In the heat of the moment, with Ava's laughter echoing in the room, a calculated corporate sound, he silenced the nagging voice in his head. He chose the thrill of the immediate, the hollow victory of conquest over the profound, terrifying, and sacred promise he had made to his wife. He was lost in the intoxicating illusion of power, completely unaware that his real world, the one that truly mattered, was already gone. The silence in the penthouse was a living entity. It pressed in on Marcia from all sides, amplifying the frantic thumping of her own heart. For an hour, she had sat on the glider in the nursery, trapped in a paralysis of shock and grief. But as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple, the ice in her veins began to melt, replaced by a slow-burning rage. A heated confrontation would be a performance for his benefit. Her tears would be a currency he would use to buy her forgiveness. Her anger would be a storm he could patiently wait out. No, that was the old script, and she was tearing it up. Her response would not be an emotional outburst, it would be a strategic retreat. A vanishing act. With a newfound chilling clarity, she stood up. She walked into their master bedroom, a sprawling space with a panoramic view of the city he had conquered. The room smelled of him, of his expensive cologne, of the crisp linens he insisted upon. She went to their walk-in closet, a space larger than her first apartment. His side was a meticulous display of tailored suits and designer shoes. Her side, once filled with her own power suits and architectural drawings, was now dominated by soft maternity wear. She pulled out a single suitcase, a sturdy, practical one she'd used for site visits back when she had a career. With trembling but determined hands, she began to pack, essentials only. Comfortable clothes, her prenatal vitamins, the small, leather-bound journal her father had given her. She packed the ultrasound photos, tucking them safely between layers of sweaters. He hadn't even bothered to look at the latest one. Her eyes fell on the velvet box on her nightstand. Inside, the diamond necklace he had given her for their 3rd anniversary glittered mockingly. She left it. She left the designer handbags, the expensive shoes, all the trappings of the life he had provided. They were not gifts. They were chains. She walked back to the nightstand and slipped off her wedding ring. The platinum band, engraved with the date he had promised to love and cherish her forever, felt cold and foreign against her skin. She placed it deliberately in the center of his pillow, a silent, damning statement. There would be no letter of explanation. The empty space beside him in their bed would say more than words ever could. Her phone buzzed. It was her mother, Carol. She let it go to voicemail, knowing her voice would betray her. She couldn't bear the questions, the worry. Not yet. Instead, she opened a text message to her father, Robert. His number was under Dad, a simple, steadfast title. "Can you pick me up from the Amtrak station in Saugatuck? Arriving around 11 p.m. I'll explain everything when I get there. Please don't tell Mom yet. I need you." The response was almost immediate. "I'll be there, sweetheart. Whatever you need." A single tear rolled down her cheek, but it was a tear of relief, not sorrow. Her father had always been her rock, a quiet, gentle man who built beautiful furniture with his hands and had taught her that a person's true worth was in their integrity, not their net worth. James, with all his millions, was bankrupt in the ways that mattered. She took one last look around the penthouse. It was a beautiful, hollow masterpiece, a monument to a man's ambition, but not a home. Not anymore. She had tried to breathe life into its sterile walls, to fill it with love and warmth, but she was trying to build on a foundation of lies. Architects know better than anyone that a structure with a compromised foundation is doomed to collapse. With her suitcase in hand, she walked to the door. She didn't look back. The private elevator descended smoothly, whisking her away from the gilded cage in the sky. As she stepped out into the cool evening air of Chicago's Gold Coast, the doorman tipped his hat. "Good evening, Mrs. Orsini." "It's Smith," she said, her voice clear and steady. Marcia Smith. She slipped into the back of a waiting car service she'd ordered, the driver already programmed with the destination, Union Station. As the car pulled away from the curb, she watched the magnificent skyscraper that housed her former life recede in the rearview mirror until it was just another glittering spire in a city of them. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the reassuring flutter of her son. "It's just you and me now, little one," she whispered into the darkness. "We're going home." The train pulled out of the station exactly on time, its powerful horn a mournful cry that echoed her own heartbreak. But as the city lights blurred into a distant constellation, a different feeling began to take root. Freedom. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. For the first time in a long time, Marcia Smith was the sole architect of her own life. James Orsini walked into the penthouse a little after midnight, a triumphant hum still vibrating under his skin. The deal with Ava was unofficially sealed, and the night had been a potent cocktail of power and passion. He loosened his tie, the familiar weight of exhaustion and victory settling upon him. He expected to find Marcia asleep, the soft glow of a lamp on her bedside table as she read one of her pregnancy books. Instead, he was met with an unnerving silence, a deep, profound quiet that the sprawling apartment never truly possessed. "Marcia!" he called out, his voice echoing in the marble entryway. No answer. A flicker of annoyance sparked within him. Was she angry that he was so late? He'd sent a text. He walked into the living room. Her favorite cashmere throw was folded neatly on the sofa, not tossed aside as she usually left it. The prenatal vitamins were gone from the kitchen counter. A small, cold knot of dread began to form in his stomach. He moved quickly to their bedroom. The lights were off. "Honey, are you asleep?" he asked, his voice softer now. He flipped the switch and the room flooded with light. The bed was empty, the sheets on her side perfectly smooth, as if she had never been there at all. And then he saw it. Sitting in the center of his pristine white pillow was her wedding ring. The sight stole the air from his lungs. The platinum band glinted under the recessed lighting, a small silver indictment. It wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't a cry for attention. It was a declaration. "No," he breathed, the word a raw whisper. He stumbled backward, his mind refusing to process the scene. This wasn't possible. This wasn't part of the plan. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He grabbed his phone, his fingers fumbling as he dialed her number. It went straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Marcia. Please leave a message." Her cheerful, recorded voice was a cruel mockery. He tried again, and again. Straight to voicemail every time. He called her mother's house in Michigan. No answer. Her friends in the city, one by one. Each call ended the same way. Confusion, concern, and no answers. His heart hammered against his ribs as he raced through the apartment like a madman. He threw open the doors to her closet. A cavernous gap stared back at him. Her comfortable clothes, her maternity jeans, her sensible shoes, all gone. The suitcase she favored was missing. But the expensive gowns, the designer heels, the The jewelry he'd lavished upon her remained, hanging like ghosts of the woman he thought he owned. The reality of the situation crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. She hadn't just left for the night. She had vanished. She had meticulously excised herself from his life, taking only what was truly hers and leaving behind the hollow shell of their marriage. He sank onto the edge of their bed, his head in his hands. The silence he had craved, the escape from domesticity he had sought in Ava's arms, was now a suffocating presence. The penthouse, his throne in the sky, felt like a tomb. Every object in the room screamed her absence. The book on her nightstand, the scent of her lotion lingering in the air, the soft indentation on her side of the sofa. His mind replayed their last conversation, her gentle reminder about the doctor's appointment, his casual, dismissive promise, the loving text message he had ignored. He had been so consumed by his own desires, his own fears, that he hadn't seen the fracture lines spreading right beneath his feet. He had treated her love as a given, a stable asset in his portfolio of success, while he gambled it away on risky ventures. He thought of his son. Their son. A baby he had never felt kick, whose heartbeat he had only heard about second-hand. Marcia was 7 months pregnant, carrying his child, and she was out there somewhere, alone. The thought was a shard of ice in his gut. What had he done? His phone buzzed. A message from Ava. Still thinking about tonight. You're a king, James. He stared at her name, and for the first time, the sight of it filled him with a profound revulsion. King? He was a king of nothing. He had been sitting on an empty throne in a fool's paradise. He picked up Marcia's ring, its weight insignificant in his palm, yet heavier than anything he had ever held. It was the symbol of a promise he hadn't just broken, but had pulverized. As the city lights pulsed on, indifferent to the unraveling of his world, James Orsini faced the horrifying truth. In his relentless pursuit of everything he thought he wanted, power, freedom, control, he had lost the only thing that had ever truly mattered. And he had no one to blame but himself. The fresh, clean scent of Lake Michigan, so different from the polluted air of Chicago, filled Marcia's lungs. Saugatuck, Michigan, welcomed her not with open arms, but with a quiet, steady embrace. Her childhood home, a sturdy craftsman her father had built himself, nestled among towering maple trees, stood as a fortress against the chaos she had fled. Her father, Robert Smith, had been waiting at the train station as promised. He hadn't bombarded her with questions. He simply took her suitcase, wrapped her in a fierce, protective hug that smelled of sawdust and integrity, and whispered, "You're home now. You're safe." 2 weeks had passed, in a gentle blur of healing. Her mother, Carol, a woman with a will of iron disguised by a gardener's gentle hands, had transformed Marcia's old bedroom into a serene sanctuary. She had cried, of course, when Marcia finally told her everything, but her tears quickly gave way to a quiet fury directed squarely at James. Since that day, Carol had become her daughter's shield. "He's called again," Carol said one morning, her tone carefully neutral as she placed a plate of scrambled eggs in front of Marcia. "5th time this morning. His parents have called twice as well. The Orsinis are in a full-blown panic." Marcia focused on buttering her toast, her hand not quite steady. "What did you tell them?" "The truth," Carol said, sitting down opposite her. "That you are safe. The baby is safe, and that you are not ready to speak with anyone. I told his mother that when her son learns the meaning of respect, her daughter-in-law might reconsider. I believe that's the last we'll hear from her for a while." A small, watery smile touched Marcia's lips. Her mother was a warrior. But the reprieve felt temporary. The world James inhabited, A world of lawyers and relentless pressure would not be held at bay forever. "Sweetheart," Robert said, entering the kitchen with the morning paper. He placed a gentle hand on Marsha's shoulder. "We'll protect you for as long as you need, but you need to start thinking about what comes next. For you, and for this little guy." He nodded toward her belly. He was right. Hiding in her parents' home wasn't a long-term solution. She was an architect, a planner. She needed a blueprint for her new life. That afternoon, while her mother was at her book club, Marsha sat at her father's heavy oak desk and opened her laptop for the first time since she'd left Chicago. Her personal email was an avalanche of frantic messages from James. "Marsha, please, just tell me you're safe. I was a fool. I'll do anything. I'm so sorry. I can't live without you." The words were hollow, predictable. They were the desperate pleas of a man who had lost control and was scrambling to get it back. She deleted them all without a second thought. Then she opened her professional email account. It was a ghost town, dormant for the better part of a year. But as she scrolled through old messages, a spark ignited. There were notes from former clients, colleagues praising her old designs. It was a reminder of a time when her identity wasn't tied to a man's last name. She was Marsha Smith, the architect who had won the Young Designers Award for her work on sustainable community housing. A new email pinged at the top of her inbox. The subject line read, "Saugatuck Community Project." It was from the town council. They were looking for an architect to design a new lakefront library and community center, a project focused on eco-friendly materials and harmony with the natural landscape. They were looking for someone with local roots and a modern vision. Her heart beat a little faster. It wasn't a skyscraper in a major metropolis, but it was real. It was meaningful. It was a chance to build something beautiful and lasting from the ground up. It was a chance to rebuild herself. That evening, a sleek black car she didn't recognize pulled into the driveway. Her stomach clenched. James. He had found her. Her father met him on the porch before he could even ring the bell. Through the screen door, Marsha watched the confrontation. James looked terrible. He was gaunt, his expensive suit rumpled, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. "She's not ready to see you, James," Robert said, his voice low but unyielding. He stood with his arms crossed, a simple carpenter blocking the path of a millionaire. "Robert, please," James's voice cracked. "I just need to know she's okay. I need to see her. She's safe. The baby is safe. That's all you need to know right now," Robert replied. "You had your chance to be there for her, and you chose to be somewhere else. Actions have consequences. Showing up here unannounced isn't going to fix anything. It's just another selfish act. Go home. Respect her space. It's the only currency you have left." James stood there for a long moment, defeated. He finally nodded, his shoulders slumping, and walked back to his car. Marsha watched from the window as he drove away, a storm of conflicting emotions warring within her. Part of her felt a shred of pity for the broken man he appeared to be. But the larger part, the part that remembered the cold indifference of his betrayal, knew her father was right. This was not a fortress of silence meant to punish him. It was a space of healing, meant to save herself. James's world, once a finely tuned machine of his own making, was now a chaotic mess of malfunctioning parts. His corner office, with its commanding view of the city, felt like a prison. The framed photo of Marsha on his desk, her radiant smile at their wedding, was a daily torment. He'd lost weight. He barely slept. His legendary focus was gone, replaced by a constant, gnawing anxiety. He'd finally broken things off with Ava in a short, brutal phone call. She'd been dismissive, almost amused by his domestic drama. Her lack of empathy was chilling. "Honestly, James," she'd scoffed, "she'll come back. They always do. Now, about that biotech deal." He had hung up on her, the sound of her voice making him physically ill. How had he ever found her calculating coldness attractive? His company, Orsini Capital, was suffering. His partners were noticing his disengagement, his erratic behavior. Rumors were swirling. He had built his reputation on being unflappable, a man who could see 10 moves ahead. Now, he couldn't even see a path through the current day. The true reversal, the blow that would shatter the last vestiges of his ego, came a week later. He was in a board meeting for the Omnicorp acquisition, the deal he had been celebrating with Ava the night Marcia left. The CEO of Omnicorp, a grizzled veteran named Marcus Thorne, looked at him with undisguised contempt. "The deal is off, Orsini," Marcus said bluntly. "We're going with a counteroffer from Blackwood Venture." James was stunned. Blackwood was Ava Chen's firm. "Their offer can't possibly be better than ours. We have the inside track." Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, you had the inside track, all right. And it seems you shared it." Blackwood came in with a proposal that specifically addressed every single one of our board's private concerns, concerns we only ever voiced to you. They knew our exact pain points and our bottom line. It's almost as if someone handed them our playbook. The blood drained from James's face. The private conversations with Ava, the confidential details he had shared, pillow talk he had mistaken for intimacy. She hadn't been his partner. She hadn't been his equal. She had been his rival, and she had been playing him from the very beginning. The affair wasn't just a dalliance. It was corporate espionage. He had sacrificed his marriage for a woman who had used him as a pawn to humiliate him and poach the biggest deal of his career. The irony was devastating. He, James Orsini, the master manipulator, had been played for a fool. The walk back to his office was the longest of his life. The whispers of his colleagues followed him down the hall. He closed his door, sank into his chair, and for the first time since Marcia left, he wept. Not tears of self-pity, but tears of profound, gut-wrenching shame. He finally saw it all with horrifying clarity. His entire life had become a hollow performance. He wasn't a titan. He was an insecure boy from Philly, terrified that someone would discover he didn't belong. He'd used money and power as a shield, and he'd used Marcia's unconditional love as a safety net he never thought would break. And Ava? He had been drawn to her because she was just as broken and ruthless as he was. That afternoon, he did 2 things. First, he called his lawyer and began the process of selling his majority stake in Orsini Capital. The money, the power, the reputation, it was all meaningless. A currency that couldn't buy back his soul. Second, he found the number for a therapist, a highly recommended psychiatrist specializing in narcissistic personality traits and trauma. The irony wasn't lost on him. He made an appointment for the next day. He was at rock bottom, stripped of his professional pride and his personal life. It was a terrifying place to be. But in the rubble of his imploded world, for the first time, he felt a flicker of something real. The humbling, painful, and necessary process of tearing himself down had begun. He had to understand why. Why had he sabotaged the only good thing in his life? The answer, he knew, was buried deep within him, in a past he had tried to outrun. The therapy sessions would be an excavation, and he was terrified of what he might find. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that it was his only way back, not to Marcia, but to himself. The next 3 months were a brutal education in humility. James traded his Chicago penthouse for a sterile corporate apartment in the suburbs. His days were no longer filled with high-stakes meetings, but with long, grueling therapy sessions with a no-nonsense woman named Dr. Miller. She peeled back the layers of his carefully constructed persona with surgical precision. They talked about his father, the man who provided for his family financially, but was an emotional void, who taught James that a man's worth was measured by his paycheck, not his presence. James came to understand that his affair with Ava wasn't about sex or passion. It was a desperate flight from intimacy and responsibility. He had been terrified of becoming a father because he had no blueprint for being a good one. So, he had subconsciously sabotaged his own happiness, recreating the emotional distance of his childhood under the guise of ambition. It was a painful, ugly truth to confront. He made no attempt to contact Marcia directly, respecting the boundary her father had set. He learned through a mutual acquaintance that she had taken on a local architecture project. The news brought a pang of both pride and sorrow. She was rebuilding her life without him, as she should. One crisp autumn evening, as he was staring out his apartment window at a world that no longer felt like his phone rang. The caller ID read, Robert Smith. James's heart leapt into his throat. He answered, his voice unsteady. Hello? James, it's Robert. The older man's voice was gruff, devoid of warmth, but also of the sharp anger from their last encounter. Marcia doesn't know I'm calling, and Carol would have my head if she knew. But I see my daughter every day. She's strong, but she's carrying more than just a baby. She's carrying the weight of this whole mess. James listened, holding his breath. I've been a husband for 40 years, Robert continued. Marriage isn't about perfection, it's about repair. But you can't repair something with empty apologies. She's seen men like you before, men who say they're sorry when they get caught. What she hasn't seen is what you're doing to change the man you are. I'm in therapy, James said quietly. I sold my company. I'm trying. There was a long pause. Good, Robert said, the single word carrying a surprising weight. Then write her a letter. Not an email. A real letter. Don't fill it with excuses or promises. Tell her what you've learned about yourself. Tell her the truth about your fears. She needs to hear it. Not for you. For her. So she can close this chapter, one way or another, before the baby comes. The line went dead. Robert's call was not an olive branch. It was a challenge, a chance to prove he was capable of one truly honest act. That night, James sat at a simple desk with a pen and paper. He wrote and rewrote, crumpling sheet after sheet. Finally, near dawn, the words came. He wrote not of his love for her, but of his failure to love himself. He wrote about his father, his fear, and the profound emptiness that had driven him to betray the one person who saw the good in him. I'm not writing to ask for your forgiveness, he concluded. I know I don't deserve it. I'm writing because I finally understand what I broke. Not just our marriage, but my own integrity. Our son deserves a father who is fighting to be better, and I promise you I am fighting. I will wait, and I will continue to do the work, for as long as it takes. He sealed the letter and sent it via overnight courier, with no expectation of a reply. 2 days later, his phone rang in the middle of the night. It was an unknown number from a Michigan area code. He answered immediately. James? It was Carol, Marcia's mother. Her voice was strained, urgent. It's Marcia. She's in labor. Her water broke an hour ago. James's world tilted on its axis. Is she okay? Is the baby okay? Things are moving fast. She read your letter this morning. There was a pause, and James could hear the conflict in Carol's voice. This is her decision, not mine. She said, if you want to be there for your son's birth, You have 3 hours to get to Saugatuck, General. Don't you dare make her regret this." He was out the door before she finished the sentence, car keys in hand. The letter forgotten on his desk, the therapy sessions, the months of painful self-reflection. It had all been leading to this single moment. This wasn't about a second chance for his marriage. It was about his first and only chance to show up as a father. As he sped through the dark, empty highways, every mile brought him closer to a reckoning and the terrifying, hopeful beginning of a new life. The fluorescent lights of Saugatuck General Hospital felt harsh and sterile after the darkness of the highway. James burst through the emergency room doors, his coat still damp with the cool night air, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The 3-hour drive had passed in a 2-hour blur of adrenaline and prayer. "I'm here for Marcia Smith," he said to the nurse at the reception desk, his voice breathless. "I'm the father." The nurse gave him a long, appraising look before nodding toward the elevators. "3rd floor, maternity. They're waiting for you." The elevator ride felt like an eternity. What if he was too late? What if she had changed her mind? The doors opened to reveal Robert, his face etched with a mixture of exhaustion and apprehension. "She's asking for you," Robert said, his expression unreadable. "But let me be clear. This is for her and the baby. The moment you cause her any distress, you're out. Understood?" "Completely," James said, his voice raw. He pushed open the door to room 304, and the world slowed down. Marcia was propped up against a mountain of pillows, her face flushed and beaded with sweat, her beautiful features tight with pain. But she was magnificent. A warrior. Carol was beside her, wiping her brow with a cool cloth. Both women looked up as he entered, and the air crackled with the weight of unspoken history. "You came," Marcia whispered, her voice hoarse. "I wouldn't be anywhere else," he said, staying near the door, terrified of crossing an invisible boundary. Another contraction racked her body, and a pained gasp escaped her lips. Instinct took over. He moved to her other side, opposite her mother. Marcia's hand shot out and gripped his with a strength that surprised him. The simple, desperate touch after months of separation was an anchor in the storm. He held on, letting her squeeze as hard as she needed, channeling every ounce of his regret and hope into that simple connection. As the contraction subsided, her eyes met his, and for the first time, she truly saw him. The designer suit was gone, replaced by a rumpled sweater and worn jeans. The confident swagger of the millionaire had been replaced by the haunted, humbled look of a penitent. "Your letter," she breathed. "Mom brought it. I read it." "It doesn't matter now," he said, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "Nothing matters but this. Right here." A quiet understanding passed between her parents. Carol squeezed her daughter's shoulder, and she and Robert slipped out of the room, giving them a fragile bubble of privacy. "I'm scared," Marcia admitted, her vulnerability a fresh wound. "Me too," he answered honestly. "But you're the strongest person I know. You've already proven that." The next few hours were a primal blur of pain, encouragement, and sheer force of will. James never left her side. He breathed with her, held her up, and whispered words of encouragement, his voice a steady presence in the chaotic symphony of childbirth. He wasn't her husband in that room. He wasn't the man who had betrayed her. He was simply her partner, bearing witness to a miracle he had nearly forfeited. And then, with one final, heroic push from Marcia, the room was filled with the loud, furious cry of a new life. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, placing the squirming, perfect infant onto Marcia's chest. Time stopped. James stared, overwhelmed, as Marcia laughed through her tears, touching their son's damp hair. "Hello, little one," she whispered, He was a miracle, a testament to a love that had existed before the lies, a love that had, against all odds, created this perfect being. With a nod from Marcia, James shakily cut the umbilical cord, severing the physical tie, but feeling an invisible, unbreakable one snap firmly into place. Later, after the nurses had cleaned up, and the proud grandparents had returned, Marcia made a quiet request. "Do you want to hold him?" He looked at her, his eyes asking for a permission he didn't deserve. She simply nodded, and with infinite care, she transferred their son into his arms. The baby was so light, yet he carried the weight of the entire world. He had Marcia's eyes. "I was thinking of a name," Marcia said softly from the bed. "Leo, it means lion, for strength." "Leo," James repeated, the name feeling sacred on his tongue. "Leo Orsini." As he said it, the baby yawned, his tiny hand wrapping around James's finger. In that small, powerful grip, James felt the first glimmer of redemption. He looked at Marcia, her face exhausted but glowing. He opened his mouth to say something. "I'm sorry, I love you. I'll fix this." But she stopped him. "Not now, James," she said gently, but with a firm edge. "Not today. Today is for him." He nodded, understanding completely. Today was the first day of their son's life, and perhaps, if he was very, very lucky, it could also be the first day of his own. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it was illuminated by a single, brilliant ray of hope. 6 months later, spring had breathed new life into the small town of Saugatuck. The ruthless tech mogul James Orsini was gone, replaced by a man who found purpose in assembling a crib and mastering the perfect temperature for a bottle. He lived in a small rented cottage by the river and worked remotely as a consultant, his schedule dictated by his son's needs. Marcia Smith, meanwhile, was thriving. She had launched her own architectural firm, Smith & Associates, specializing in sustainable design, and her library project was already winning acclaim. She had reclaimed her name, her career, and her power. Their lives were separate but intertwined by the love for their son, Leo. James's visits, once supervised, were now relaxed afternoons at the park. He had shown up every single day. He had done the work. One sunny afternoon, as they watched Leo take a wobbly step on the grass, Marcia turned to him. "I'm getting coffee downtown tomorrow morning," she said, her tone casual, but her eyes holding a deeper meaning. "If you're free, I'd like to talk about us, about who we are now." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a promise. But it was a beginning. A new blueprint, drawn on a foundation of hard-earned trust and the resilient strength of a woman who had walked through fire and rebuilt a better life on the other side. The journey of Marcia and James is a powerful reminder that sometimes the deepest betrayals can lead to the most profound transformations. If you were moved by their story of resilience and the difficult road to a second chance, please hit the like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who believes in the power of personal growth. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that explore the complexities of the human heart. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.